All right, so I wanted to post this to YouTube so everyone can learn more about raising backyard Coturnix quail. It is our passion here at Feathered Connections. It's what we focus on, being more self-sufficient through your own meat and eggs. So this is our business. These are a few of our different colors that we have. We are in city limits and we make it work in a very small space. Our backyard is probably 0.1 acre in Utah, which means everybody's really, really close in proximity. And there's a couple pictures. Okay, so here's what our small space in Provo looks like. To the left, we have our quail shed. It's nothing special. It's just basically a hardware cloth box with an insulated metal roof. And it's mainly just to keep them in the shade, for one, and also to keep predators out because the cages have egg rollouts and predators can easily reach into those and get the birds or take the eggs. And this way we just know that the birds are safe. Also, if the birds happen to get out of the cage or anything, then they're safe in the shed. And then to the right, we are working on building a rabbit shed, as we also have rabbits. And then on the bottom here, I just have a statistic. So chickens require 10 square foot minimum per bird. That's if you have them cooped up, not if they're free ranging. But quail, Coturnix quail, you can house 3 to 3.5 quail per square foot. I'm not sure where the extra half comes from, but that's what they say. So this is what the inside of our quail shed looks like. To the right are our breeder cages. Some of them have J feeders. We're in the process of trying to do no waste feeders. So the cage in the back, that's why they don't have J feeders. They have a different kind of feeder. And they have egg rollouts. So the eggs just roll out the front. Then the eggs are clean. They're not stepped on. They're not eaten. And then on the left of the shed, we have a couple grow out cages. They don't have egg rollouts because the birds are smaller. We don't want them to get out and get hurt. So we have those. And then towards the back, I have a brooder for birds that don't need heat anymore, but they're still growing out. And then I have a breeding hatching time cage that I use for some small breeding projects as well. And then we're trying something new this summer. We have a couple bigger dog kennels, and we've kind of used those to grow out our extra males. We'll grow out like 50 to 100 male Coturnix quail at a time before we process them for meat. And they tend to be quieter when they're separated from the females. If we're growing them out in the shed, once they reach about 4 weeks of age and they start crowing, it just, they kind of ping off each other and the shed can get really loud and rowdy. So keeping them separate kind of helps keep down the noise, especially at night, sometimes when they get carried away. And then just here's a picture in our rabbit shed with some of our babies. Here is one of the big things that I tell people when I go to farmers markets or just when people ask me about quail versus chickens. I tell people quail is the new chicken, and here are the reasons I give them. So chickens, they're not fully feathered for a long time, like months, and so therefore they need a heat lamp a lot longer. Quail don't need supplemental heat after 2 weeks, and they're fully feathered and ready to go outside by 4 weeks, and that's year round. They actually do amazing in winter, which most people don't realize because they're so small. Um, Chickens start laying eggs around 6 to 9 months on average. Some chickens, it's less. And then quail are laying eggs by about 5 to 7 weeks. Like I said before, chickens require 10 square foot per bird, where quail, you can have 3 adults per 1 square foot. Chickens often, even though they look healthy, they can often carry diseases and not show symptoms for a long time, if at all, even ones that look healthy. And quail generally, um, they just don't contract as much disease. It's really why you can't eat chicken raw or chicken eggs raw. It's not recommended because salmonella. Quail don't really contract salmonella. Um, as far as chickens, a lot of cities have very, very specific ordinances if you can have chickens at all. And if you can, there's a specific number. There's a lot of rules about where your coop has to be. Most of the time, you cannot have roosters. Whereas with quail, Coturnix quail are a domesticated variety. They're not considered a game bird. A game bird would be more of your native species of quail, like California, Valley, Gamble, that kind of stuff. Um, Bob Whites, yeah. So wherever you're at, whatever kind of quail you have running around your backyard, those you have to have special permits for. We're talking about Coturnix quail here. They're the domesticated version of the Japanese quail. It's the same thing, but they are not really game birds. So they don't fall under the game bird category. They're not poultry. They're not waterfowl. So really, it's kind of the equivalent of having canaries. And that's why they're not really mentioned in city codes. So there's kind of a gray area. You're not really told you can't have them. And the roosters make a very different noise. So a lot of times you can get away with it. I just tell people generally keeping your neighbors happy is always a good thing, just so you don't get into issues. But if we're going with specifics, I've not seen a city code that specifically says you cannot have these types of quails. And yeah. And so, as far as the rooster thing, if you're trying to be more sustainable for meat or eggs, if you don't have a chicken rooster, it's really hard because if your hens were to pass away, like you just don't have a way to get more chickens unless you're going out and buying more chicks and that type of thing. With quail, if you can have a roost, if you can make it work and it doesn't bother you, having a rooster is a good idea because then you have fertile eggs, you can incubate the eggs, you can get more, and you can keep propagating your own flock. So they both can be great pets. They're both really cute, but those are kind of the main differences. So I'm going to hit, it's not going to let me do it. Okay, so what I would do, because one of the most common questions I get asked is what does a quail crow sound like? Now, granted, all different quail make different noises, but I'm talking specifically Coturnix quail. Go on YouTube, look it up. This video right here is super funny because they slow it down. It's a unique noise no one's ever heard, so most people aren't going to really recognize the noise. And you usually have with Coturnix quail 5 hens to 1 rooster. They're so busy with the hens, they're not really crowing. Whereas chicken roosters, very, very loud, very distinct, so people immediately know what it is and where it's coming from. And chicken hens actually, most people don't realize they sing an egg song, and it's very, very loud. I didn't realize that when we got chickens. We're allowed to have chickens, but I think the neighbors don't appreciate it when the chickens lay their eggs and they sing their egg song. It can get pretty loud and rowdy. Okay, and so I would suggest like pausing the video and reading these specific statistics. They came from the book Quail and Its Eggs by Aaron Wilmore. Not a super, I think the book wasn't edited, but it has a lot of really, really good information in there about the nutritional value of a quail egg. And these statistics are based on one quail egg compared to like a chicken egg. And it's usually about 3 or 4 quail eggs equal a chicken egg. So if one quail egg has 13% protein, and that's a fourth the size of a chicken egg, and the chicken egg only has 11. I mean, that's a lot of protein. They have B vitamins. They can, according to this book, they can purify the blood and remove heavy metals. They have iron, um, just all kinds of vitamins and stuff. It's a superfood egg is essentially what it is. And I do get a lot of commentary on, well, the eggs are so small. Why would you choose to raise this when you can just raise chickens? And my main reason is because we live in city limits. We're allowed 2 to 6 chickens in our city, depending on where we're at. And like I said, there's a lot of regulations. There's really not regulations on quail. And because of that, we've had upwards to anywhere between 1 and 300 quail at a time in a very, very small space. And they're much quieter. And when you're getting, 100 eggs a day, it doesn't really matter the size because 100 quail eggs is still more food than like 2 to 6 chicken eggs. And on average, quail do lay more eggs. So that's really, really nice to be able to get fresh eggs in the city limits. These are just fun facts. A lot of people don't know that quail eggs do not crack like regular chicken eggs. You do not need a specific quail egg scissor. That's what this picture is. I prefer them. I think they're a lot faster. But the reason why quail eggs don't crack like regular eggs is not because the shell is harder on the outside. That's a common misconception. It's actually that the inner membrane is thicker. So once you break through the membrane, a lot of times your outer shell has flaked so much, gets into your yolk, and it's just annoying. So it's easier to use something sharp. I prefer quail egg scissors, but you can also use kitchen shears or a serrated knife, whatever your preference is. Another common thing we get asked is, what do quail eat? It's essentially what chickens eat, but we personally in Utah feed our quail a higher percent protein. So when they're baby chicks, as soon as they hatch out, we feed them 28% game bird starter. That's not always available everywhere. So we tell people 28% turkey starter is the exact same. They're able to eat that as well. So either one of those is really great. It gives them a good jump on their protein, which they need a lot of when they're small because they're like doubling in size like every few days, if not every week. So they need a lot of protein to help them get started. When they are between 4 and 8 weeks and they switch outside to our quail shed with all the layers, we switch them to a 24% protein layer mash. We have a local mill that mills that, and we also give that to our chickens because we have some bantam silkies and like unique breeds that need a higher protein. So we just feed everybody 24% layer mash. However, this is in Utah, and this is just based on the guy that got us started. That's what he wanted for his quail, and we have his last remaining lines, and so that's what we've done with ours. And so that's what we use personally, but I have seen a lot of other breeders go a lot lower on the protein, and some of them just feed them regular chicken feed. Ultimately, there's not a wrong way to do it. It's whatever works best for you and your animals because you want it to work for you so you can be more self-sufficient. So find what you can find and make it work. There's a lot of really cool videos. I recently saw one about a guy in the Philippines doing emergency food storage for his quail, and they mixed like sunflower seeds, like chunky dog food, and like bird seed in a blender, and then they gave that to him. So there's lots of different ways you can do it. This next slide is something I give all my customers at the farmer's market and tell them It's just a way to cut costs as far as feed is concerned, because feed costs are rising. And obviously, you want to save money where you can when you're trying to be more self sufficient. So, the main thing we do is we ferment our feed. We don't always ferment it, but the birds, chickens do it too. They'll sift through the feed. If you get the feed wet and mix it so it's chunkier and thicker, if it's fermented, it's healthier for them. They'll eat less, they'll get more nutritional value. However, if you don't have time to ferment it, you can get it wet and then give them clumps like of wet food, and that prevents a lot of waste. We also grow fodder. It's the animal equivalent of microgreens. Whatever whole grain you can find the cheapest, you water it, rinse it. After 3 days, it starts to sprout. It kind of grows into like a grass carpet, and you can just give it to them. They love it. Then the last thing, because quail are such a high production bird, a lot of protein does help them. So if you're supplementing this way, you're going to want protein like mealworms. The reason I suggest mealworms is because they are probably by far the easiest thing you can raise in your house, because in the beetle phase, they're not going to fly away. So there's tons of YouTube videos and Pinterest, and just Google anything about mealworms. It's a really, really easy process to start your own mealworm farm, and then either dry them for the birds or give them to them live, however you want, but it's a great way to add protein in. So here's just a couple more pictures of little chickies, and talking about why we love quail. This graphic is found on our websites as well. And here's some more pictures of our ladies. There's another picture I tried to do like a Jurassic Park photo shoot and put the chicks on the Barbie car. It was really fun. Baby chicks are just super fun. Here's some more pictures. This particular bird is Galatis. She is our pet bird. She's our only pet quail and the only one with a name. She's just got a very unique, sweet personality and loves the kids, so she kind of gets the special treatment. And then, so quail are covey animals. It's just a small flock of birds. They're used to living in close quarters. So even if you had a big space, they're going to clump together. So that's why, personally for us, cages work really well, because they're used to living in closer groups. That being said, though, the reason we do cages is it just suits our needs better, being in a city, having very limited space. But you can do an aviary, you can do a combination, you can do whatever you want, because ultimately they're your birds and there's no wrong way to keep your quail. Whatever you can do to be more self-sufficient is awesome. And I don't know why, when this is recording, it's not letting me show these videos. However, if you message me on social media or just look these up, these are great videos to know how many quail you need to start with to be self-sufficient. It's the most common question I get asked is, how many should I start with? And that's going to vary based on how often you want to eat. This first video is just quail math on how many quail you need to be more self-sufficient on eggs. It's going to vary on your family size, how many eggs you eat, how often you want to eat them. This is a video from my Shire farm. In the next slide also is a video from my Shire farm where he continues quail math, but then he talks about quail for meat. So you can get started and have a good amount of meat and a way to continually propagate your flock on a pretty low budget. So it's really, really awesome. Another question I get asked a lot, can chickens and quail live together? Now, like I said, there's no wrong way to do it, and you can do whatever you want with your animals. My recommendation is I would not put the two together. There's a big size difference generally from a standard sized chicken. Even a bantam sized chicken to a quail is a big size difference. Um, and there could be fighting. However, like I stated before, chickens often can carry diseases that they look healthy, they're fine, they're living their best life, but they can easily pass it to quail, and the quail can get very sick and die very quickly. So, those are the two reasons I do not recommend keeping them together. Some other questions we get asked a lot: how do quail do in winter? People worry a lot because they're very small. They do amazing. I think they actually do better in winter than they do in summer, because they're able to foof up and create group heat and cuddle together. And yeah, honestly, our quail shed that's made out of hardware cloth, we just put plastic on it in the winter, um, just so they have a break from the wind. And that's really all they need. They don't need extra heat or anything like that. They really do amazing. Um, the average number of eggs per year is gonna vary based on the variety of Coturnix quail you get, but it's usually about 250 to 300 eggs per year. They can lay year round. They're not seasonal layers like some wild quail where they'll only lay a few months out of the year, period. They just need light, not heat, light. So they have to have 14 to 16 hours of daylight to lay eggs. So what we do is we have a couple solar panels attached to the outside of our quail shed, and they absorb a little bit of light in the winter, not as much, and the lights will turn on for 3 or 4 hours at night till it runs out of its solar energy. And although it's not a perfect system, we don't have power to our shed, and it works for us, and they'll still lay about half the amount of eggs they would during like the summer. And it works. But if you have power to your shed, or you have them in a room in your house or in your garage, then you will have no problem because you can just turn the light on. That's just how we've kind of worked around it. Okay, so this might seem like a silly question to some people, but I do get asked a lot if you need a rooster for your hens to lay. This goes for all types of birds. You do not need a male for the hens to lay eggs. The hens are born with a certain amount of eggs they're going to lay, and it is not contingent on whether there is a male around. So yeah, you don't need a rooster. You're still going to get the eggs when the hens reach that maturity and age. So why we chose Coturnix quail versus wild quail or other breeds is something we also get asked. It's mainly because wild quail, well, they're wild. So they're not as domesticated. They're not easy to handle. Some of them don't do well in captivity. It kind of depends on the breed. But you also need for a lot of them, you need special permits to raise them. We raise ours for meat and eggs. So Coturnix quail, they're more tame. They're easier to handle. They grow up a lot faster, and they're going to lay eggs year round. So ultimately, if you're raising them for meat, you're definitely going to want Coturnix quail. If you're raising them for eggs, you really are too, because the reason, at least in Utah, why you only see baby quail running around certain times a year is because they only lay seasonally. So ultimately, for self-sufficiency, I think Coturnix quail is the way to go. How the quail eggs taste, it depends on the person, but I have a McDonald's palate, so I think they taste very, very similar to chicken eggs. However, if you have a more refined palate, there is a reason that quail eggs are considered a delicacy, and quail eggs have a more kind of creamy taste. And then the meat, this is how Zach from My Shire explains it, and I think it's the best way to explain it. The meat is not as dark as turkey meat, and it's not as light as rabbit or chicken. It's kind of a cross between the two. So instead of like a dark meat versus a light meat, it's kind of like a gray meat, like a mix between the two. But it's very, very good. And it's a subtle difference. It's not really strong. It's not gamey either, because ultimately your quail are eating what your chickens are eating. So it's going to taste very, very similar to turkeys raised on a farm, like chickens raised at your house, that kind of thing. So you might want to pause this and write down this information, but these are all the Facebook groups and YouTube channels I recommend. I highly recommend you come join us in these groups and become part of the community. It is so tight-knit and so awesome. We even have a Quail Con every year at My Shire Farm in Miamisburg, Ohio on Labor Day weekend. To find out more about that, you can look on any of the YouTube channels, or you can go to myshirefarm.com. Yeah, and I hope you guys join us. And then here are QR codes to our Facebook page and our Instagram. And our website is just our name, featheredconnections.com. We have tons of quail and homesteading merch. We have blog posts. We have up-to-date availability on our quail chicks, adults, fertile eggs, eating eggs, cages, falconer food, and meat. And also coming soon, rabbits as well. So, yeah, check that out. We also have our farmers market schedule, and we have links to Dale's Quail's cages, which I highly recommend. They're super awesome, and he's a great guy. And we have links to Whiskey Tango Farms to get awesome, amazing hatching eggs. They are also really close friends of mine out of Wisconsin. Dale's Quails and Whiskey Tango Farms are in Wisconsin, and they are awesome. I highly recommend them. And then there is our information. And yeah, hopefully this helps somebody out and you learned more about quail. If you have any other questions, I'm pretty easy to reach. My information is on all my pages and my website. Shoot me an email or a text. And yeah, thanks for watching.